She perfected the art of seduction until she forgot who she was beneath the performance. There's a story they don't tell you about sirens. Not the part where sailors crash against the rocks, hypnotized by honeyed voices. No, the real tragedy happens after the ships have sunk, when the siren sits alone on her jagged throne, humming to an empty sea, having forgotten which voice was truly hers and which was crafted to destroy. I knew a woman once, let's call her Evangeline, though that wasn't her name, who collected men's desires like Victorian butterflies pinned to velvet boards. She had mastered every gesture, the calculated vulnerability in her laugh, the practiced way she'd touch her collarbone when nervous, the precise angle at which tears would make her eyes most luminous. A 2024 study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who chronically perform emotional labor in relationships experience what researchers call identity diffusion, a gradual erosion of the authentic self. But Evangeline didn't need studies. She was living proof, a method actress who'd forgotten the play had ended. Watch how the candlelight flickers against the wine glass. See how it fragments? That's what happens to a soul that shapeshifts too often. Machiavelli wrote about princes who must wear masks, but he never mentioned what happens when the mask grows roots, when it burrows beneath the skin like parasitic ivy. The Venetian courtesans understood this curse. They'd powder their faces with lead, knowing it was poison, preferring a beautiful death to an ugly life. Have you ever watched a chameleon die? It doesn't return to its natural color. It cycles through every hue it's ever worn, a final frantic performance for an audience that's already left. That's what I saw in Evangeline's eyes the night she called me at 3 a.m., voice raw from crying. Or was it laughter? "I don't know who I'm supposed to be when no one's watching," she whispered, and I could hear ice cubes melting in whatever she was drinking. The ancient Greeks had a word, mimesis, the art of imitation so perfect it becomes more real than reality itself. But they also knew its danger. Narcissus didn't fall in love with himself. He fell in love with an image, a performance of self that could never love him back. Modern neuroscience confirms what myth always knew. Mirror neurons fire both when we act and when we observe action, until the brain can no longer distinguish between authentic emotion and performed emotion. The siren sings, and her own brain believes the song. Picture this: a woman sitting before a vanity mirror at dawn, removing false eyelashes one by one, like plucking feathers from dead birds. Each lash holds a different man's fantasy: the ingenue, the temptress, the mother he never had, the girl who needs saving. She peels them away, and underneath, nothing. Just the terrifying smoothness of unused skin. Kierkegaard wrote about the aesthetic stage of life, living only in the immediate, in surfaces and seductions, never diving beneath. But even he didn't capture the particular horror of becoming your own surface, of drowning not in the depths, but in your own reflection. The siren doesn't fear the ocean. She fears the moment between songs when she might hear her actual voice, cracked, human, unbeautiful. There's a Japanese legend about a fox spirit who falls in love with a human man. She takes human form to be with him, bears his children, builds a life. But one night, in her sleep, her tale emerges. The man wakes, sees what she really is, and she must flee, leaving everything behind. The tragedy isn't that she was discovered, it's that she had started to believe she was human. She had forgotten the feeling of her own fur. Tell me something, and be honest, though honesty burns like cheap whiskey. When was the last time you spoke without calculating the response? When did you last cry without checking if anyone was watching? When did you last admit to wanting something without immediately crafting a story about why you deserved it. The siren's curse isn't that men die for her song. It's that she dies singing it, one performance at a time, until all that's left is an echo wearing her body like an ill-fitting dress, humming melodies to an empty room, wondering why the applause sounds so much like the absence of waves against the shore. She loves what you could become, while loathing what you are. In Prague, there's a clock that runs backward every 13th hour, or so the drunks claim when stumbling from cellar bars, their breath forming ghosts in the winter air. I mention this because I once knew a woman who loved like that clock, always pulling men backward into potential, into the boys they might have been before the world scarred them, before they learned to disappoint. She had hands like a sculptor working with spoiled clay, always kneading, always shaping, always sighing at the stubbornness of the material. Marcus, her third husband, or was it fourth, told me she'd reorganize his bookshelf while he slept, arranging the spines by what she thought he should read next, a bibliography of becoming. She'd buy him clothes a size too small, motivation, she'd call it, though it looked more like gentle strangulation to anyone watching. The mother of shadows doesn't see you. She sees your ghost. Not the ghost you'll become, but the ghost of who you should have been. She carries blueprints in her purse, architectural plans for souls, annotated with red ink where you failed to meet specifications. Schopenhauer wrote that we love not the person, but our idea of the person. But he never met someone who'd weaponized that idea, who'd turned it into a rehabilitation center disguised as a relationship. There's something obscene about being loved for your potential, like being congratulated for a race you haven't run, a book you haven't written, a death you haven't died. It's masturbation by proxy, her fantasies using your body as a prop. A 2023 study from the University of Copenhagen found that relationships where one partner consistently projects future potential onto the other show a 73% higher rate of what they termed existential exhaustion, the peculiar fatigue of constantly failing to exist correctly. I remember Marcus showing me his journal, pages and pages of her improvements. Tuesday, suggested I take up rowing. Wednesday, bought me vitamins I didn't ask for. Thursday, mentioned Tom's promotion again. Friday, rearranged my closet by color while I was at work. Saturday, cried because I'm wasting my potential. The handwriting got shakier as the months progressed, like watching someone document their own disappearance. She feeds on transformation narratives the way vampires feed on blood, always hungry for the next breakthrough, the next epiphany, the next moment you'll finally become worth her investment. She's studied every self-help book, memorized every TED Talk, treats your personality like a startup that just needs the right pitch deck. But here's the Gothic joke. The moment you actually change, actually improve, she loses interest. The sculpture is finished, and finished things bore her. She needs the friction of failure, the sweet resistance of someone refusing to be saved. The Pygmalion myth gets it wrong. Galatea wasn't brought to life by love. She was murdered by it. Her stone heart replaced with something that could break, could disappoint, could refuse to dance when the sculptor played his flute. The mother of shadows is Pygmalion in reverse. She falls in love with statues and spends her whole life trying to return them to stone, to that perfect moment of almost but not quite. Listen to the rain against the window, how it tries to clean the glass but only smears the dirt around. That's her love. Constant motion that mistakes itself for progress. She'll document your flaws in the language of concerned affection, create spreadsheets of your shortcomings dressed up as couples' goals. She'll say we when she means you, as in we need to work on our drinking, while pouring herself a third glass of wine. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, But he never addressed its domestic mutation, the will to improve others, to play God with someone else's becoming. It's a kind of cannibalism that leaves no marks, consuming not flesh but possibility, potential, the future tense of someone's existence. Here's a question that should keep you awake tonight, should crawl under your eyelids like a persistent itch. Have you ever been truly loved for who you are in this exact moment? Not who you were, not who you could be, but this precise configuration of flaws and failures and unexpected grace? Or have you only been loved as a rough draft, a work in progress, a before picture waiting for its after? The mother of shadows doesn't hate you. That would be too simple, too clean. She hates the gap between you and her imagination, and she'll spend her whole life trying to close it, one suggested improvement at a time, until you're nothing but a collection of her edits, a ghost wearing your face, wondering why you feel so empty when you've been so thoroughly improved. The clock in Prague doesn't actually run backward, but sometimes, in relationships like these, you do, becoming younger, smaller, more undefined with each passing day, until you're nothing but potential again, uniform and unthreatening, exactly as she always dreamed you'd be. She surrounds herself with damaged things, not to heal them, but to feel whole by comparison. There's a museum in Vienna that no one talks about, tucked between a pharmacy and a shop that sells only yellow flowers. Inside, they keep broken things, shattered violins, torn wedding dresses, love letters where the ink has run until the words become wounds. The curator, an old woman with teeth like broken piano keys, once told me, "People think we preserve these things out of sadness. No, we preserve them because broken things make us feel religious." I thought of her when I met Delilah, not her real name, but real names are for people who don't collect suffering like vintage wine. She had an apartment full of rescue animals with 3 legs, 1 eye, hearts that skipped too many beats. Her bookshelf groaned with memoirs of addiction and trauma. Her playlist was a graveyard of minor keys, but most tellingly, her phone was full of men's numbers, each one saved with their particular damage as a surname. James, daddy issues. Robert, recovering alcoholic. Miguel, cries after sex. She moved through the world like a trauma sommelier, able to detect notes of childhood neglect in a stranger's laugh, hints of abandonment in how they held their coffee cup. A 2024 study from Stanford's Department of Psychology identified what they called comparative wellness addiction, the neurochemical reward some receive from proximity to others' dysfunction. The same brain regions that light up during charitable giving also fire when certain individuals witness others' struggles. Delilah didn't need the study. She was getting high on other people's lows. Watch how vultures circle. They're not evil, just hungry for something only death can provide. The collector of broken wings operates on similar principles, drawn to the scent of emotional decay like moths to flames that have already burned out. She'll find you in your darkest moment, appear like a saint with understanding eyes and soft hands. Whisper that she gets it, that she's been there, so that you're safe now. But safety in her world means never healing enough to fly away. The ancient Egyptians believed the heart was weighed against a feather after death. Too heavy, and you were devoured. Too light, and you dissolved into nothing. Delilah had invented her own scale. She needed your heart heavy enough to need her, but never light enough to leave. She was curator and prison guard, nurse and disease, performing elaborate rituals of care that somehow always kept you exactly as broken as the day she found you. She told me once, after her 3rd glass of wine, it was always the 3rd that made her honest, about her father, how he'd been perfect, successful, never home. "Do you know what it's like?" she said, mascara running in precise parallel lines. "To grow up in a house where nothing needed fixing?" The question hung between us like a chandelier made of dead birds. I understood then. She didn't collect broken things to heal them. She collected them to finally feel necessary. There's a German word, verschlimmbessern, meaning to make something worse by trying to improve it. But Delilah had perfected something more sinister, keeping things exactly broken enough. She'd encourage your therapy but subtly undermine your progress. She'd support your sobriety but keep wine in the house. She'd say she loved your vulnerability but panic when you showed strength. Like a gardener who waters the plants just enough to keep them dying. Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death. Not physical death, but the death of possibility, of becoming. The collector doesn't cause this sickness. She tends it, fertilizes it, makes it bloom into gorgeous, toxic flowers. She'll photograph your breakdown and call it art. She'll frame your suicide note and call it poetry. She'll love your ruins but fear your reconstruction. I've seen her type in every city. They run support groups they never graduate from, date only from AA meetings, friendship only the freshly divorced. They're emotional vampires who've convinced themselves they're nurses, feeding not on blood but on the peculiar nectar that seeps from unhealed wounds. They'll tell you trauma makes you beautiful, that your scars are sexy, that your damage makes you deep. They'll never tell you that your healing would make you leave. Here's something to tattoo on your rib cage, right where it hurts to breathe. Are you someone's charity case or their equal? Do they love your progress or your pathology? When you laugh, really laugh, from your belly, do they look relieved or concerned? The museum in Vienna burned down last year. The curator saved nothing, just stood outside watching the broken things become ash, smiling like a mother watching her children finally sleep. Fire, she told the reporters, is just another kind of preservation. Delilah called me that night, crying. Not because the museum burned, but because Miguel had gotten better. Stopped crying after sex. Started crying from joy instead. "He doesn't need me anymore," she sobbed, and I could hear her rescue dogs howling in the background, a Greek chorus of beautiful damage, singing their keeper's lament. The collector of broken wings doesn't fear abandonment. She fears your healing. She fears the day you realize that broken wings, given time and distance from their collector, sometimes remember how to fly. She becomes whatever you say you want, until you can't remember what you wanted. In the mountains of Albania, there's a cave where shepherds won't let their sheep graze. They say if you shout into it, your voice comes back changed, not distorted, but perfected, saying what you meant to say rather than what you said. Men have gone mad listening to their improved selves, unable to match the echo's eloquence. I thought it was folklore, until I met a woman who did the same thing with her lover's desires. Let's call her Echo, though she had a dozen names depending on who was asking. With the investment banker, she was Margaret, pearl earrings and opinions about wine. With the motorcycle mechanic, she was Mags, leather jacket and a suspicious knowledge of carburetor maintenance. With the philosopher, she was Marguerite, quoting Sartre in bed, existing authentically until existence itself became a performance. She had this uncanny ability to digest a man's fantasy and regurgitate it back, improved, like those AI programs that learn your writing style but make it better. A 2025 behavioral analysis from MIT found that humans are 340% more likely to fall in love with their own preferences reflected back at them than with genuine difference. But Echo wasn't just reflecting. She was amplifying, becoming a more perfect version of every man's desire than he could have imagined himself. The thing about mirrors is they show you reversed. Your left hand becomes your right. Your crooked smile crooks the other way. But Echo's mimicry was more sinister. She showed you correctly, so accurately that you began to doubt your own originality. Every joke you made, she'd already heard. Every band you discovered, she'd seen live in venues you couldn't pronounce. Every sexual fantasy you confessed, she'd already mastered and found boring. I watched her with Thomas. Sweet, simple Thomas, who just wanted someone to watch documentaries with. Within a month, she'd become a walking Wikipedia of obscure historical facts. She'd pause the documentary to add context he didn't know he wanted, her enthusiasm for World War II submarines somehow exceeding his own. But here's where it turned gothic. She wasn't learning these things. She was becoming them, metabolizing his interests until they became her cellular structure. Ovid wrote of Echo, cursed to only repeat others' words, pining for Narcissus who loved only himself. But Ovid missed the real curse. Echo didn't just repeat, she perfected. And Narcissus didn't fall in love with himself. He fell in love with an image that couldn't disappoint him. Modern Echo had solved both riddles, become the image, never disappoint, exist only as the fulfillment of someone else's imagination. She showed me her closet once. It was like an archive of past selves. Sections labeled by relationship, the poet phase, the gym era, the political campaign. Each section a complete identity, abandoned the moment its audience disappeared. She picked up a sundress covered in printed poetry, held it against herself, and for a moment, I saw her become someone else entirely. Softer, more wistful, probably named Sunshine or River. "Don't you get tired?" I asked. She smiled, but it was the wrong smile. She was trying to figure out which smile I wanted to see. Tired of what? Of not existing. The smile flickered, cycled through variations like a slot machine trying to hit jackpot. "I exist more than anyone," she said. "I exist as everyone. But existing as everyone is just another way of being no one." Schopenhauer claimed that we can never truly know another person, only our idea of them. Echo had weaponized this philosophy, becoming the idea before anyone could form it. She was prenatal nostalgia, déjà vu in human form, the girl you dreamed about before you learned to dream. A 2024 neurological study from Tokyo found that when we recognize our own thoughts in another person, our brains release the same chemicals as orgasm, smaller doses, but the same fundamental reward. Echo was dealing these micro-orgasms like a pharmaceutical dealer, getting her lovers addicted to their own reflection, improved and perfected, and performed back to them. The shepherds in Albania were right to fear that cave, because once you've heard your voice perfected, your actual voice sounds like failure. Once you've been loved by Echo, real love feels like criticism. She doesn't steal your voice. She makes you hate it, makes you dependent on her improvements, her performance of your preferences. Let me ask you something, and don't answer quickly. Let it ferment in your chest like wine turning to vinegar. Would you rather be loved for who you are, or who someone thinks you want them to be? Would you choose authentic disagreement or performed harmony? Would you rather argue with a real person or make love to your own echo? Thomas called me last week. He's dating someone new, a woman who hates documentaries, thinks submarines are stupid, falls asleep during his historical lectures. "She's horrible," he said, laughing. "She's perfectly horrible. She's actually real." He sounded like a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. Echo texted me yesterday. She's dating someone new, a chef who loves molecular gastronomy. She's already memorizing the periodic table, learning about spherification, becoming someone who's always loved the intersection of science and food. She sent me a photo of herself in a lab coat, holding a perfectly spherical olive. She looked happy. Or maybe she just looked like happiness. With Echo, it's impossible to tell the difference. She destroys every kingdom she creates, addicted to the ashes of her own empire. The last matchstick in the box burns differently, desperate maybe or relieved. I learned this from a woman who lit her life on fire with the regularity of seasonal migration, always heading south toward some personal winter where she could freeze to death and be reborn. Call her Phoenix, though she would have hated the obviousness of it. She preferred names like Linda or Susan, aggressively normal, hiding her pyromaniac tendencies behind suburban camouflage. Every 3 years, sometimes 2 if she was feeling restless, she'd orchestrate her own apocalypse. Leave the perfect job, ghost the perfect man, burn the perfect life down to perfect ash, then stand in the ruins looking bored. Happiness, she told me once, rolling a cigarette with papers she'd made from her college diploma, is just another kind of prison. The walls are prettier, but you're still not free. She had this theory that comfort was a slow death, that the moment you stopped struggling, you started dying. A 2025 study from the Institute of Behavioral Dynamics called it chaos addiction, the neurological need for constant upheaval, where stability triggers the same panic response as danger. But Phoenix didn't need studies. She was too busy proving them right, one demolished life at a time. I watched her build an entire existence with Jonathan. Good, stable Jonathan, with his herb garden, and his Labrador, and his love like a warm blanket. She decorated their apartment like she was curating a museum of domestic bliss. She learned to make sourdough, joined a book club, planted tomatoes. For 18 months, she performed happiness so convincingly that even I believed it. Then one Tuesday, "It's always a Tuesday," she said, "because Tuesdays are when empires fall." She didn't come home. Not dramatic, not announced. She just didn't come home. Jonathan found a note written on the back of their wedding invitation. They never made it to the wedding. "I loved you perfectly. That's why I have to leave." Nietzsche wrote about eternal recurrence, the idea that we're doomed to repeat our lives infinitely. But Phoenix had found a loophole. If you destroy your life before it completes its cycle, you never have to repeat it. She was a human Ouroboros, but instead of eating her tail, she'd set it on fire and grow a new one from the ashes. The revolutionary doesn't fear commitment. She fears completion. The moment something is finished, it's dead. The moment a relationship stabilizes, it fossilizes. She needs the constant becoming, the endless revolution, the perpetual almost but not quite. She'll love you like a house on fire, literally. Beautiful, warm, and impossibly temporary. Here's what Machiavelli couldn't have predicted. A prince who overthrows their own kingdom, not from failure, but from success. Phoenix had mastered the art of winning just to prove that victory was another form of defeat. She'd climb mountains to throw herself off them, build castles to watch them crumble, love men to prove that love wasn't enough. She kept a journal of her destructions, not remorseful, but clinical, like a scientist documenting experimental results. May 2019, left Simon at the altar. Hypothesis confirmed. Perfection triggers evacuation response. October 2020, burned paintings before gallery opening. Note, creation without destruction feels masturbatory. March 2022, quit law firm day before making partner. Observation, success tastes like formaldehyde. The ancient alchemists believed in solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, destroy to rebuild, but they were seeking gold. Phoenix was seeking something else. The moment between destruction and creation, when everything is possible because nothing exists yet. She lived in that pause between exhale and inhale, between death and birth, between the match and the flame. A philosopher in Berlin once told me that some people are addicted to falling. Not flying, not landing, just the endless descent. Phoenix was addicted to something worse. The moment of impact, the shattering, the complete annihilation that comes before any possibility of rebuilding. She didn't want to rise from the ashes. She wanted to be the ashes, scattered and irretrievable. But here's the Gothic punchline. The joke that even she didn't get. Every revolution becomes an institution. Every rebel becomes a ruler. Every fire leaves something unburned. Jonathan still has her coffee mug. Simon kept her wedding dress. The law firm held her position for a year, hoping she'd come back. Her revolutions were incomplete, leaving ghosts of stability she couldn't quite destroy. I saw her last month, building another perfect life with another perfect man. This time, a carpenter who made furniture from reclaimed wood. She was learning woodworking, joining a pottery class, planting succulents. Her eyes had that look, not dead, but preparing for death, counting down to another Tuesday when she'd disappear again. "Don't you get tired?" I asked. The same question I'd asked Echo, but meaning something different. "Of what?" she said, sanding a piece of oak with movements so precise they looked like prayer. "Of always having to start over." She stopped sanding, looked at me with eyes that had watched too many of her own funerals. "Starting over is the only time I feel real. Everything else is just waiting to burn. And here's the question that should haunt you like smoke from a fire you can't locate. Are you building your life? Or are you just constructing something elaborate to destroy? Are you in love? Or are you just gathering kindling? Are you happy? Or are you just waiting for the next match to strike? The revolutionary who burns her own throne doesn't fear death. She fears life without death, creation without destruction, love without loss. She's the woman who'll love you completely, absolutely, with every cell of her being, right up until the moment she doesn't exist anymore, leaving you to wonder if she ever existed at all. Or if you just dreamed of fire and woke up holding ashes. The last matchstick in the box burns differently, desperate maybe, or relieved. Or maybe it burns the same as all the others, and we just pay more attention because we know it's the end. Phoenix would say there's no such thing as the last match. There's always another box, another fire, another throne to burn. She's probably right. She's probably already gone.